Thank you so much for joining us for What's in a Name, a critical discussion about how and who identifies ethnicity. I want to introduce our panelists today, first starting with April Anderson. She's an attorney and a PTA president of Franklin Elementary, Santa Monica Unified School District. Thank you so much for joining us, April. We also have Jeff Jamerson. He is the vice president of programs and services for Aviva Family and Children's Services. Welcome, Jeff. We have Jo Cito. She is a proofreader and copy editor for BBDO Worldwide. Thank you so much for joining us today. We also have Ann Lee. She's a licensed social worker and a project director and researcher for UCLA. Welcome, Ann Lee. And then, of course, we have Rafael Santoya. He is our Director of Auditing and Monitoring for Children's Bureau. And allow me the honor to introduce our moderator for today, Ms. Karina Casco, who is our Chief Program Officer and also a Children's Bureau DEI co-chair. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you, Melvin, and thank you for that introduction. What's in a Name is the discussion we're going to talk about. I'm going to be moderating it. And as Melvin talked about, our identity is just so crucial and such an important part of who we are. And yet, sometimes we're not seen by others or heard or even have spaces where we feel that we belong. Our panel will be discussing their identity and how they experience the world as they navigate the feeling of belonging and feeling heard, and how we open up spaces for others to be heard as well. We're also going to take the opportunity to discuss intersectionality and the importance of allyship, which, as you know, all of us need to really think about how we can be allies as much as possible. And how can we really contribute to creating spaces that really honor our diversity and our authentic selves. So with that, let me start with you, Rafael. Tell me a little bit about how you identify yourself.
Hi, goodness, this question particularly is one that I've been thinking about for some time. And I'm like, how do I piece a puzzle of myself? Because I seem a certain way. My phenotype is, I present a certain way, but then there's things that are about me that aren't necessarily that are more than that. So I am first and foremost, I would say definitely a Latino male. I am a father, I am a husband, a member of the LGBT community. But the one thing that I think defines me now, and this is very recent, is I am a father of a child who is chronically ill. So because of that, in terms of my identity, that has shaped the way I see life, even professionally and personally.
Great, Rafael, thank you for sharing. Let me throw this at you, Jeff. How do you identify yourself?
Well, first, it's a pleasure to be here. I think on the surface, that seems really simple, a simple question, but it can be considered or end up being complex. Depending on what space you're in, who you're talking to. Like for myself, I might identify in different ways depending on, the space that I'm in the audience, right? But for the purposes of the question as you just posed it, I would say I'm an African-American male. I am a husband. I'm a pool player. I love billiards. I'm a digital artist. I'm a scholar. I have a PhD, in academia, and yeah. So I would. That's pretty much, I think, what I would say.
Great, Jeff, and you do bring up a lot of issues and how we present ourselves in spaces, and we'll get back to that because it's really important for us to really think about how our identity or how we might have to change a little to be in certain spaces. Jo, tell us how you identify yourself.
Well, first and foremost, I think it's important to say that I'm second generation. I'm bilingual, Chinese American, Angelino, a proud Bruin. Karina, don't give me no lip about Trojans. A woman, a daughter of immigrants, sister, wife, cat parent, friend, and ally. I think that's, and so as someone who works with words, for a living. It's one of these things where it's like nouns and adjectives kind of thrown together in a salad, right? But how you live these words, that's, I think, part of identity.
Well, that's amazing and very well said. And of course, coming from a writer. And
Thank you.
I'm going to toss it to your fellow cat lover, Anne. So Anne, tell us about how you identify yourself.
So it's interesting because I am sort of part of the dominant culture, right? I'm sort of the unmarked category. I'm a WASP woman. But I would say the nuances with my identity are, I definitely feel like I'm a Gen X woman. Social worker is a big part of my identity, researcher. I know that I am privileged, and that seeps into my awareness of who I am. Knowing that I was born on third base. I didn't hit a triple. And trying to keep that in the forefront of my mind and the way I move through the world. And there's another thing too that I wasn't thinking about, but until just this 1 minute ago is I'm a cancer survivor, so I have sort of an invisible disability sometimes, right? Because of my treatments, I have some bad days or some side effects or whatever. And so then, on those days, I'm very aware of feeling like, the difficulties of having a disability. But then most of the time, I don't, and I feel okay, and I'm back into that, feeling like born on third base kind of feeling.
That's very powerful. And I'm not a baseball follower like April, but it's actually a powerful statement. And I love how you really gave us that symbolism. So thank you, Anne. April, last but not least, April, tell us how you identify yourself.
Hi, I am April, and it's weird listening to all of your explanations and identifications. It really got me thinking about how one of our panelists mentioned that, he presents as one way, but then in certain situations, he definitely there are other ways. In other words, there's other ways of identifying yourself. And I feel that very strongly. I am an African-American woman. I am a wife. I've been married for, I've stopped counting and I can't do math right now, since 2007. But I have 3 kids, so I'm a mom, and that's like the thing that I deal with, mostly during the day. I'm also, I'm working with the PTA, so I'm also kind of managing that aspect. So I've got all these different kind of spheres where, the one constant is, I'm an African-American woman, but, in some spaces, when I'm trying to relate to a lot of the kind of Santa Monica PTA parents who, are not really my core people, I'm always, finding ways to relate to them. Then, and in those cases, I'm an African-American mom who went to Penn and is a lawyer. So I'm making these connections via, all these other aspects of my background. But then, when I'm hanging out with, when a friend comes, a friend of mine from childhood comes into town, I'm April from West Oak Lane in Philly, and we're just chit-chatting about the old days. And that's a completely different April, than you're going to get at work when I'm, April IP attorney, I'm just, what legal associations are you a part of? Are you working on this project? So it's just, I have my core that I kind of carry with me throughout all of these spaces, but in different arenas, I try to reach out and relate to people in different ways. So, and it's all of that. So.
And I love that you talk about it in a sense of belonging, because you're trying to create spaces where you belong or just have something in common. Before I ask the next question, I consider myself, I'm an immigrant, I'm from Honduras, I'm Latinx, and I'm Jewish. And that's how I consider that's my identity. And then I think of what everybody else said in this panel, that I forget that I'm also a mom, I'm also this and that. And I think it's very powerful what you said, April, about just who you are in different settings. In this setting, you're just your kid's mom. In other settings, you are a social worker, or you are a Latina, or an immigrant, or what have you. So it's really important, and your identity just means so much. So let me just toss this to you, Jeff. You talked about, you like music, you're a DJ, you're an African American male in the social services field. Why is your identity so important in what you do and in your community?
I think identity is important because it fosters a sense of self-worth, belief, and people tend, whatever you kind of internalize within yourself as a belief or a concept, the world will reflect that back to you. That's just kind of thing that I hold, like a philosophy, an internal philosophy. So, personally, I try to create metaphors and positive thoughts and affirmations within myself that revolve around identity, that start with I am statements. And it's kind of crazy. Every now and then I'll run into someone and they don't know I do that, but they'll throw that back out to me, and it's just kind of weird when that happens. But yeah, I'm sorry. I hope I didn't go off tangent, but I don't know if that answers your question, Karina.
Yeah, I think it goes back to belonging, right? And so, Rafael, tell me, does anything that Jeff said, does it resonate with what you feel, why your identity is so important?
Absolutely. I think that, oh goodness, what came to mind there is like, there's only one me. And so, and I was just in my mind, I was thinking like, and that me has changed significantly and will continue to change. Then how can I stay true to myself and try to be as genuine as possible? And so.
The authenticity. Sounds like authenticity. That's great. So Joe, how does belonging shape your identity?
Belonging is interesting. As for me personally, I grew up as a minority within a minority. I grew up in a Latino community here in LA. And for me at first, it was all about connecting with classmates. We're all on a certain track. And then once I got to college, I connected with Asian Americans. Because in my school, there were 3, maybe 4 non-Latino families. So, it was definitely being a minority within a minority. And, with a sense of belonging, as I was mentioning earlier about identity, it's so much is what you do, the actions, the verb, that you take daily, be it, Jeff is a musician or a scholar or whatever it is you do. I think that fosters a sense of community with people, that you find a common ground where you're like, we don't look the same, but we like the same music, or we like the same sports teams or whatever. I think that's very important, especially nowadays, seeing how Gen Z, they are really, how should I say, like the sense of belonging that we take for granted, having grown up in a non-digital world where it's just easy to just go to your friend's house and be like, hey, let's, go ride a bike or something, and kids these days, it's all about the screen time. So we're going to see ramifications with that, with mental health. So I think belonging is one of the core pillars of having just a good sense of identity for the next generation.
And you brought up community, which I think is so crucial, Joe. And I think of just the community that you have to build to have the sense of belonging. And I would like to pose this to Anne and also April, just as moms in a community too, is how do you navigate spaces that you might not feel that sense of belonging? I know, Anne, as a researcher, you are in this research institution that you might not fit in sometimes. And so you want to maybe take the question first, Anne, and then we can move it to April.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So I think a sense of belonging in my little department, in my work group, enables me to bring all my resources and experience to the table as a social worker. I'm the only social worker in my department of like 50 people. And the ability to have a sense of belonging, like I belong there, I'm wanted there, and I am known for who I am and what I have to offer there, gives me that like sort of healthy entitlement to say, hey, from the social work perspective, it's this, or hey, from my experience, what if we try the other? And I've definitely been in spaces where I wasn't so sure about that. And so, we all lose out when people aren't empowered to bring their authentic selves to the table. But definitely, I have days too where it's like, do I really belong here? Like the imposter syndrome thing. And then that's good to have your maybe your closer work buddies, where you can pull them aside and say, reality check here. Let me sound this out, and then hopefully widen that feeling of belonging again.
And that's good that you have that safe space to be able to say, hey, I don't feel like I belong. Is it, how can I feel a little closer? So April, tell me how you navigate spaces that you might not feel that sense of belonging.
It's really funny, like that is something that I have dealt with all of my life, but it's with every new situation that I find myself going into, I still have that initial feeling of, oh my gosh, this isn't a space where people like me are. Like, I've been raised, I grew up in a working class Black neighborhood, but I always went to school in like white spaces. So I've just been in white spaces all my life. I've always been, one of two in a class, maybe if I'm lucky, or, and it's been that way kind of throughout life. And here I am in Santa Monica, and, one of like maybe three families at Franklin or whatever, something crazy like that. But I think despite the fact that I have to feel that feeling in every new situation I go into, which, most people do when you go into a new situation, you're like, oh my gosh, is this a place for me? Is this a place where I belong? And I feel like with people of color, and I don't want to generalize and speak for everyone, but you're so different, at first glance, whereas someone else can kind of blend into the background. There's no blending, and that's it's a good thing on a lot of levels, but I think it's something that as a person of color, you feel a lot more maybe than other folks. But what I try to do is I acknowledge that feeling, and I, because it's something I'm quite familiar with, but then what I do is I immediately seek common ground with the people that I have to work with. And also I do this thing, and I don't know how healthy this is for society as a whole or whatever, but it's something I naturally like to do. It's like almost this disarming thing that I do where I'm just like, hey, I like this, just like you do, I watch this show, just kind of finding relationships and finding common ground with different people to just let them know, hey, I look different, but, there are these kind of human being, American human being type things that, exist within me, exist within you, that kind of are that connection that we all have. And so kind of bringing that, to the surface in people's minds, it's just reminding them that, you may not know a lot of people that look like me, you may not know me, but, we have some things in common. And that's always a great place to kind of start a relationship.
I want to piggyback on what you just said. I think I sometimes feel that, as a white sort of middle class cisgender person, I I get the benefit of the doubt that of course we have something in common of, because I think people are conditioned to think of somebody who looks like me as like normal and safe. And so, I'm very well aware that I don't necessarily have to work as hard to get that benefit of the doubt or get that goodwill, when I walk into a new space, even though I may be shaking in my boots.
Right, you feel it too, right?
Yeah, I know that, again, that feeling of like, I've got, I'm on third base already. I've got goodwill to some extent, already.
I'm sure as a woman too, like you said, being a researcher, like you step into the situation, you're like, all right, I got to let people know that, I'm here and I bring value to this organization. Like having to put that out there, because sometimes that's not the natural feeling that people have when dealing with someone who's other.
I think you both did a great job really transitioning to the next question. And Jeff, I'll ask you this. In your current organization, how do you create spaces so that people can have a sense of belonging?
Good question. I mean, I think like Children's Bureau, in the last couple of years since COVID hit and all the social injustice that has happened in our country has kind of been like a mirror that has been put in front of all of us. And at Aviva, we all have a JEDI committee, which is Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And it's literally a snapshot of the whole agency. And so we have different people from different backgrounds, different persuasions, all coming together multiple times monthly. So that's a space that's been created. I would also think, I mean, I know this, that in each program area or service area, you have natural spaces that are created, natural spaces of belonging that are created by just our staff on their own. It's not coming from upper management or from the executive or leadership level. People tend to, as April said, gravitate towards each other. And I think Annie said it too, based on likes, like I know people, staff that have book clubs and movie clubs and stuff like that. They're doing stuff that's not even necessarily work related, but it's just personality related, people related, interest related, right? So, I mean, I think that's what's happening at Aviva. I think one of the strengths at Aviva, and I know this because we do a survey every year, our staff tend to be pretty satisfied and happy on our little Likert scale with each other and with levels of management and the way that we all kind of coalesce and get along with each other. With that said, there are some cliques. We do have that from time to time, and we always try to encourage people to be inclusive. So yeah.
Great. And I'm interested from the world of writing, Joe, because I think that, like you said, words are part of this and language is a part of this. How do you create those spaces? Because it's what you do is really powerful, and language is so powerful, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it is one of the last skills I believe that children gain is language, because it's so complex, right? So at my agency, just to give a little background, I work at BBDO, which is an ad agency founded in 1891, if you can imagine that. So it's been around for a long time. And we have, I'm part of a core group here that's called BBDO IDEA. And like Jeffrey's JEDI, IDEA stands for inclusion, diversity, equity, and allyship. And it's basically an intersectional employee resource group for, that's not only an internal group in that we have programming for staff, but to also make sure that our hiring and retention practices are reflective of a diverse talent pool. But we also work with our clients to kind of execute these ideals as well. And, you know, that's one of those things where it's tough when you're working with, say, AT&T, Home Depot, and, you know, these billion dollar companies, and basically telling them like, hey, this is something that's very important to our agency, and we want to help you guys incorporate this into, be it, I don't know, like commercials that we shoot for AT&T, making sure that the production houses, that the not only the staff who work on it, but the owners of any production houses or third parties that we use come from diverse backgrounds. You know, working in advertising, which is traditionally a very white space, but with upper management being very white male on top of that, you know, it's one of those things where when I walk in and I am the last person to say, this is grammatically correct, this is grammatically incorrect. And I've gotten, you know, some looks in my 20-year career of like, oh, that's interesting that you're the person who's kind of checking us on this. But yeah, you know, it's all about kind of creating a space, and this group is just one of the ways in which we try to do that within our company.
And it sounds like what you do is just very powerful, because it really creates that sense of belonging when you watch that commercial, or it does not.
Yeah.
So, wow. So this is a great way for us to transition to intersectionality. And it's really important for us to really talk about this when we're talking about spaces, and just a little bit about intersectionality without going into depth about it. A simple way of looking at it is that that all oppression is linked, and acknowledging that everyone has their own unique experience of discrimination and oppression, and we must consider everything and anything that can really marginalize people by gender, race, class, sexual orientation, physical ability, etc. In the interest of time, we won't go into like the foundation of it, how it started, but I think it's really important for us to really think about that intersectionality. Rafael, tell me, how do you promote intersectionality?
Oh goodness, that's a really good question, because as everyone was talking, and I am in a woman-dominated field, and that being said, I feel that I'm always needing, and this is part of my own oppression and my own issues, but when I'm in a supervisory capacity, I always ask for permission. So for example, it's kind of like, hey, may I speak freely? Or the one thing I learned a couple of years ago, and I think I spoke to you, Karina, about it, is I would talk to, in terms of supervision, would say, you know what, I'm big on data, I'm data driven. So I know that my language is data driven. And sometimes that's very depersonalized. So then I would say, oh, stakeholders saying this, stakeholders saying this. And a powerful supervisee at the time, woman, told me, I don't like that you say that, because it makes me feel that we're disconnected at that point in time. And then so I took that as, oh my goodness, I have to continuously adapt and adjust my style, knowing my privilege, even as a Latino male, with a woman with whatever type of, you name it, sexual orientation, gender, I have to be cognizant of how I present myself, and more importantly, ask the questions of preference. Like, Karina, I have been talking about your email signature for some time, because yours says she, her, ella, and I have been in love with it forever, because I was like, okay, there is some form of identity even in an email setting capacity. And so my thing in terms of my core is always to adapt and adjust and never be rigid.
That's great, because I think it changes, right? Intersectionality looks so different from one person to the other. How about you, Amy? I mean, April, sorry, I just called you the wrong name. How do you promote intersectionality?
In my current capacity as the president of the PTA at Franklin, one of the things that I like to try to do is I like to try to reach out to someone who externally presents one way onto committees where I don't think they would necessarily automatically choose to go into. I like to invite them into these spaces to kind of just, let's see what's going on. We're having, in our DEI committee, I'm going to try to pull some other folks in, not just, the three minorities that, the three people of color who are active in the PTA. I'm going to try to reach out and grab some people who don't typically raise their hand for these roles and everything, because this is all about exposure and, learning and growing. And it's just kind of a subtle way to just get people to experience things that they wouldn't necessarily experience, not because they wouldn't enjoy the experience, but just because they just never have thought to even involve themselves. And so we've had, we've had some really interesting and fun conversations in our DEI committee with people who are kind of new to the work. I call them, people who are new to the work. And it's been really great because, again, getting these perspectives and them sharing in other people's perspectives, it's just all about broadening their minds and opening their eyes. And it's nothing I'm forcing on people. If they don't want to do it, they're grown adults, they don't have to do it, but just getting that opening, maybe there is that one person who's I never even thought about that. So let me come to a meeting and see what's up.
Well, I think you're also talking about capturing the diversity of thought.
Yes,
And
there's that piece of it too.
And I think it really links to what Rafael was talking about, is just that adapting and learning. And so they both go hand in hand as we promote intersectionality and thinking about that component of how we see it.
I love that the adaptability that you were talking about. You're learning and you're like, oh, I saw Karina's signature. I like that. I like that. Like just, just taking it and just continually growing.
Oh, any thoughts, Jeff, in regards to what the panelists are talking about, intersectionality?
I think, how do I say it? I think in a way, because and I like to use the word complex or nuanced individuals, like as just human nature is complex. And a lot of times we try to categorize through our words people in a simplistic manner, right? And what intersectionality does is it kind of breaks apart that simplicity, and it shows that as human beings, like it's not that simple. It's not as simple as words try to make it seem. Like your first question was, how do you identify? And we could pick all these little different things that describe how we identify, whereas from an intersectional perspective, it's like all and even more, and even the unconscious that our words can't express, right? So I think a way to promote that is just to be aware of it, right? To be aware of our unconscious biases and to know that we all are complex beings, and we have something within that complexity is a uniqueness which helps make us who we are, So, I mean, that's what kind of came to my mind just off the top.
That's great, because I think the awareness is so important. And I know that Anne talked about this too, just the being on third and, that just that awareness. And I think it really leads nicely to allyship. And I just want to toss this to you, Anne, about what allyship means to you as a white woman?
You know, I feel, maybe you guys can educate me or help me with this. I feel weird about, I never call myself an ally. It's up to the people around me to see me as an ally or not. Of course, it is my intention to be an ally, but I would not, it feels weird for me to announce that about myself. And I think, you know, I'm totally learning, you know, how and trying to invent ways to be a better ally. I mean, from the macro to the micro, like, you know, one thing I'm trying to do more is in the micro ways of, like, in a meeting when someone who might not have a sense of belonging or entitlement to talk, to sort of pay attention with my whole body and sort of send the message with my whole body, like, we are listening to you. And that is as a role model to the people who may be looking to me as to how to behave, and as a signal to the person who's speaking, like, you have my full attention and respect. And, you know, then in the macro ways, in my research and the work that I do in my department, trying to put it on the table in explicit ways, like, how is intersectionality affecting how we talk about our research outcomes? Are we asking about how intersectionality affects people? Are we analyzing the data that pulls out the populations who are affected, you know, by their intersectionality, by their overlapping identities, and we're talking about them, and the outcomes and their health outcomes in this instance. And I think, you know, also because of often my place of privilege, it's hard for me to, you know, I don't want to put extra labor on anybody else, but also sometimes it's helpful to sort of ask questions and allow myself to be taught. And so walking that line of not wanting to put more labor on anybody else, you know, like April was talking about the 3 minorities who are on every committee. But also being open and available and seeking, you know, that kind of teaching and feedback.
And Anne, I think you pretty much described the definition of allyship. You know, allyship, and I'm just reading it. It's allyship is an active, consistent, and arduous practice of unlearning and reevaluating, in which a person holding systemic power seeks to end oppression in solidarity with a group of people who are systematically disempowered. And it's that reevaluating piece that I think that you're describing. So you did a wonderful job really just telling us what allyship looks like. And Raphael, can you talk a little bit about allyship? Because I think even the way you present, the permission to be honest about this, or the way you start a conversation, I love that piece of allyship. So tell me a little bit about how you practice being an ally.
Yes, I think that for me, oh goodness, it's just so ingrained, Karina, in everything that I do in terms of tone. I'm always cognizant of how I present myself and what is my tone, and the delivery, pressure, volume. And here's the thing, and I was thinking about allyship and how am I an ally? And as a father, what do I want my children to have, right? And so I always think of the primum non nocere, which is Latin for first do no harm. And that's uber, how can I say this? I think that if I go with the lens of first trying to do no harm, by default, I become an ally, because then I will continue to ask the questions, and everyone's experience is different. And so it's when we don't ask questions and assume that then we don't become allies. I don't know if I went off tangent, but that came from the heart.
It's in the questions is just that learning and adapting. And I think that that's very powerful to become a true ally. And I think, Anne, you said it, perfectly. I don't consider myself an ally. It's the people around me that can make that decision depending on my actions. So I think that's powerful. Joe, how do you practice allyship?
In my both professional and private life, first and foremost, creating a space for diverse voices and an awareness of kind of the differences, but also the things that bring us together as humans. And so for me, as I'm sure for most of the panelists here, for the past 2 years, it's been a lot of there's been a lot of work done internally, externally, that I see done by friends and family and coworkers. One of the things for me is I don't know if I've kind of overexerted myself, but I've joined every single employee resource group in the company. So I go to things from our Black Together, Acento, Open Pride. We have a disability or disability group as well. And just kind of being in a space where I don't have to say anything, but I'm just absorbing, and just kind of listening and having both the awareness and also keeping the space open, and just trying to, it's one of those things. It's like eating right, getting enough sleep, it's the thing you need to do. So, and it's just good stuff comes from it.
Yeah, it's the consistency. And I love that you say listen, because we don't listen enough and we end up finishing other people's sentences, or we create a narrative of who we think people are because of the way they look or the way they speak or what have you. And so I love that everybody here is doing a really good job trying to honor that diversity and creating spaces in not only work and their communities and personally to let people be their authentic self, because it's really at the end of the day just being you. And that's what our identity is just being who we are, what we bring to the table. So I do want to thank you all for being part of this panel discussion. I've definitely learned a lot from all of you that I might have not known before. And for the CB staff that are watching this, thank you so much for being part of this. And I hope you have a great day today for your day of learning. Thank you.